Namaskar and welcome to this exciting episode of Sattology, debunking mythology. Sattology means science of truth or study of truth. Opposite of that is mythology, which means science or study of fake, lie, or imagination. In all our shows, our attempt is to bring out the glaring inconsistencies in the international history that is being taught all over the world. And today I have a very special author who has come in second time and who's going to talk about her book. And before we start off, it's a happy Independence Day to all the Indians who are watching. And also to educate that 15th August is the year, 15th August 1947 was when India got independence from Britain, and Americans also got independence from Britain around 250 years back. So let us welcome Sri Chandni Gupta, Sen Gupta. Namaskar.
Namaskar.
So in this, we already covered last time your book in detail. So when we on the Independence Day, how do you view Prime Minister Modi's speech on the topic of maintaining your own identity? He said we have to
Yes, in
stand,
fact.
we have to debunk the old. So please go ahead. Share.
So, in fact, a very happy Independence Day to all the Indians in the US. And I'm very happy to be here on this platform. Um, I, of course, heard Prime Minister Modi's speech in the morning, and he, in fact, spoke about five very important pillars for, building a strong India. And in which one of the important things that he spoke about was the fact that we have to reminiscence our past. We have to remember our past. We have to essentially know the truth about the past, our true history, in order to move forward. If we have to build a strong nation, we have to know where we are coming from. We have to know the values of our civilization. And the fact that we come from a very beautiful, very ancient civilization. So that is something that he touched upon, and he also spoke about the fact that we have to be very focused on research and innovation. But along with that, if we do not know our history, if we do not know what our sabhyata, our civilization stands for, I think we will always be in a mirage. We'll never be able to kind of build upon whatever progress we have made so far in the 75 years of independence. So I think it was a wonderful speech that he gave, and the very fact that he touched upon going back to look forward is something that was very unique. And he categorically stated the importance of knowing our history, knowing our civilizational values, which is something which was very commendable. And I think Prime Minister Modi always touches upon very interesting facets of civilizational glory, our society, polity, economy. So this was one of his most wonderful speeches.
No, he actually touched the heart of many billions of Indians actually in this speech, not only in India but all over the world. Especially, I was seeing all the chat after the his speech, and the people were just saying that he understands what Indians are thinking, and the mood of India is also changing. And gradually now, as we know, that India had a big contribution to every single space program of the world. That is also being known now that it was Indian scientists who currently running many of the space programs, even in the US also. Now, coming back to the Indian cultural aspects, very little is known to the Americans that what British did, what the Islamic invasion did, and what did they do to undermine the traditional cultures or religions or languages of India, according to you?
Right. So, I'll begin with the Islamic invasion, and then we can, I'll touch upon the aspect of colonialism and what was the nature of colonialism in India and what harm it did. Now, one has to look at two aspects. One is, of course, the Islamic invasion and whatever wrongs were done to our civilization, to our country as as part of that. And secondly, the colonial period that we had to face, that we had to reel under for so many years. Now, when we talk about the Islamic invasions, again, we have to look at it from in two phases. The first is the period of the 11th century, when 12th century, when the invasions happened, the Delhi Sultanate, and then the Mughal period. So when we look at the Delhi Sultanate period, when the invaders come in 1192, when Muhammad Ghori comes in and he establishes the Delhi Sultanate here, uh, it had of course, a political connotation. Politically, a lot of things changed because these were new rulers who were coming in, and we were not, of course, used to, foreign invaders coming and settling here, and you know, uh, completely changing the social fabric, the political fabric of our country in many ways. Also, the way our economy functioned, we were a very, very prosperous nation before these invasions actually happened. And though many historians have looked at Indian history prior to Islamic invasions as a period of fragmentation, I think we were extremely prosperous even while being fragmented. So I think when these Islamic invasions happened, the entire culture, whether it is, be it the political culture, the economic sphere, the society, everything was impacted. As far as our culture was impacted, one very important aspect was the matter of conversions, forced conversions, I would say, because that is something that these sultans uh, did, and did very vociferously. They began converting people, and they, in fact, the culture was such, there was so much of fear created in people that if you do not convert, you will be killed. So in many ways our demography changed, in many ways our culture was altered. Secondly, they destroyed our temples. That is something that they did. That is something which happened even during the Arab conquest of Sindh in the 8th century, much before the establishment of the Sultanate. So temples were destroyed, uh, Hindus were forcibly converted, and the cultural fabric, the demography of our country was completely altered with the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate in the 12th century. This continued under the Mughals. When Babur comes in the 16th century, he, again, under him, numerous temples were destroyed. The Ram Janambhoomi temple in Ayodhya is one example. There are numerous other temples across the country that were destroyed by the Mughals, on which, of course, mosques were built, similar to what had happened in the period of the Delhi Sultanate. So the culture, our culture, Hinduism, uh, Buddhism, Jainism, our Indic religions were already facing a lot of problems because of this onslaught of Islam, which we had to face from the 12th century onwards. But we were a resilient civilization. We were extremely resilient, and we did not give up. So that was something, that was the beauty of the Indic civilization of of Bharat, that we did not give up. We continued to fight. In fact, there are numerous evidences and numerous sources which tell us that many of our kings, despite the fact that they had limited resources as compared to the marauding hordes, as compared to these invading armies, but they still gave a very brilliant fight against all these people, against Ghazni, Gauri, and later against all these Mughal emperors as well. Now, with the coming of the British, what happens is that what was already facing some sort of a decline, we were already in a we had already become very unstable because of this Islamic invasion, right? Because of the coming of the British, what happens is that the British directly attack our system of education. That is something they do. So what they did was that they shut down all the gurukuls, which was where we used to be educated, which is where the children used to go for education. There was a guru shishya parampara. Now that was something, the master and the disciple, that kind of a relationship that existed between the master and the disciple, that kind of a bond, that was completely altered because the British wanted us to be clones of them. And they, in fact, because of the minutes of Macaulay and the Woods Dispatch and all these other education policies which were brought in by the British, it to a large extent altered our way of thinking. Our social fabric had already been altered because of Islamic invasions which had occurred. But now they, because of the fact that they wanted us to think like them, and that, of course, was something that completely led to the diminishing of this Gurukul system, which was the very fabric of our education, which was where people studied the Vedas, studied the Upanishads, and this was something which was completely denied to Indians by the British, and we were forced to adopt the English education system, which is something which was not even optional. So one, if you had to get a job in the government, one had to be educated in a certain English system. So with the diminishing of this system of the gurukuls, and all the other uh, religious stress brought in by the Christian missionaries, I think a lot of things changed. In fact, culturally and politically. Politically, of course, things had been changing from the 12th century onwards. But now, I think with the East India Company coming up, and then later on the power shifting to the British Crown, I think because of these political changes and the changes in the system of education, it greatly altered our culture, and also the activities of the Christian missionaries. I think our culture was greatly affected because of that. But I think Hinduism and all the Indic religions are extremely resilient, and we have survived. So despite this, I think we have been able to survive and do pretty well.
No, one thing is very certain. If you look at the neighborhood of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, obviously India created in 1971. Those all countries are failed states because of being the religious theoretic states. You can also say to some extent fascist states also, because dictatorship has been a common norm in those countries. Now, one thing which really strikes and surprises most of the West, the Christian West, is that the Indian state, they thought that India is going to fall apart, India is going to go away, but it has emerged much stronger. And India has retained its common values across the length and breadth of India, which is Sanskrit based. And that is a problem for some sections of the people who support these kind of invasions and who are in support of their so-called masters sitting in Middle East and other places. So that mindset has not changed, and also the Indian education system has not changed. Currently, if you look at the Indian society, then you see that the majority of the textbooks glorify the invaders, even today. So, what efforts do you think should be done so that we change that perception in the textbooks? Because that's where the rubber meets the road. You need to see actually actions on the ground, like the textbooks are the major way to change that. What do you say?
Absolutely. In fact, when we look at the textbooks, particularly the NCRT textbooks, I think a lot needs to change, because the first interaction, the first understanding of a student, of a young person, when they go to school and when they read these books, what they actually understand is that the Islamic invasions actually did us some good, because the way it has been glorified, the way you know. For instance, the invaders have been glorified. Sufi saints who converted so many people, they have been glorified, right? So I think the textbooks definitely need to change. I think there is a change which is going to happen very soon, because of the new education policy. I think the textbooks would change eventually, but I feel what we have studied in the past, uh, in the NCRT textbooks, also the textbooks which we study at the college level or we read at the higher education level, I think a lot of false history has been taught to all of us, because there has been a dominance of Marxist historians. And because of this dominance of the left in Indian history, in the social and the sphere of the social science discourse in India, I think that there is a lot of prevalence of this false history, fake narratives that were created. It also was, of course, promoted by the Indian state at that point of time in the post-independence period. So I think everything needs to change, not only the syllabus, but also the textbooks, what we read, what we recommend to our students. I think everything needs to change. All these fake narratives have to be done away with. Because until and unless we do away with these fake narratives, we'll not be able to provide a fresh perspective to the people, to the learners, to the young learners who are going to schools or going to colleges. We will not be able to tell them what the actual history of India is until and unless we, stop them from reading these books. And the NCRT textbooks, of course, need to follow a lot of they need to actually follow the, I would say, the Gujarat textbook model, because I done a research project on the textbooks in India, and I found that the Gujarat textbooks, they actually are one of the best textbooks, in as far as the Indian education system is concerned, because they actually speak about their own heritage, the local heritage of Gujarat, the intangible heritage of Gujarat, the temples of Gujarat, the freedom fighters of Gujarat. All those people, all those things, all those aspects are touched upon in those textbooks of Gujarat. So I think if NCRT also starts focusing on that, I think it will be good for the students, because a sea change is required as far as the teaching of history is concerned, as far as history books are concerned, as far as what teachers recommend to their students, the readings are concerned. I think a lot of change is required. What we have studied is not what the next generation actually should study, because that is not true history. So I think NCRT textbooks at the school level and also at the college level, the books that are prescribed to students, everything needs to change. And I think I'm hopeful that with the new education policy, I think things will change for the better. But it needs to happen. It needs to happen quickly.
One of the things which comes is the like the Hindu temples. Like your book is all about the Hindu temples and how they were desecrated or destroyed. But the Western reports are completely opposite of that. Like if you look at the Western reports, they do not mention about any atrocities on Hindus, whether in Bangladesh or Pakistan or any part of the world. Whenever the Hindu is involved, it is Hindus are automatically classified into agnostic or irreligious, because the religion they recognize only three in the US, which is the three Abrahamic faiths. And this is very striking. And the community, the Hindu community all over the world, especially in the West, keeps fighting, but there is no recognition. So there is no talk about it in the media. So do you think that this kind of what do you call it, the informational apartheid or selective closing of eyes by the human rights organizations of the West also helps those elements in India to continue what they're doing?
Yes, absolutely. Because when we read reports in, online reports carried out by, say, the newspapers in the US, the New York Times and Washington Post, and all these other newspapers, even from Britain and all over the world. I can give you an example. So when the Delhi riots happened, the reportage was extremely one-sided. So there is no recognition of the fact that atrocities are happening on the Hindus. There is, of course, as you mentioned, that there is no recognition of the fact that there is a religion such as Hinduism which exists. So there is, of course, this apartheid which is there in the Western media, and also something which is propagated falsely by the so-called human rights activists, who, of course, try to push a certain narrative that atrocities happen only against the minorities. And again, to counter that, we can say that when we were under colonial rule, the British who were ruling over us, in fact, in India, they were the minority. But were they not creating atrocities here? I mean, were they not creating problems for the majority? Similarly, in today's day and age, we have seen so many numerous examples of atrocities being committed against the Hindus. So that, I think, a recognition of that is something which is very important. So only if you recognize that there is a problem will you be able to solve the problem. So I think Western media first needs to recognize that there is a problem. There is rampant killing of Hindus happening in Pakistan, whatever number of Hindus are left, that is in Pakistan. And of course, a rampant killing of Hindus massacre happening in Bangladesh. A similar case happened after the elections in West Bengal, where Hindus were actually beaten and thrown out of their houses. They had to take shelter in Assam. So these things, of course, the Delhi riots is another example where Hindus were targeted. So it is not that because Hindus are in a majority in India that we are the perpetrators. We are not the perpetrators. We are being hounded. We are being harassed. So this is something that the Western media needs to recognize. Only when they recognize it. So when we look at history, only when we recognize the fact that there was an Islamic invasion will we be able to have a dialogue about it. When we say that there is no Islamic invasion, then the dialogue ends there. The entire process, the entire academic discourse ends there when you say that there was no invasion. So we have to first recognize that there is a problem. The fact that Hindus are facing atrocities. And I think the Western media, through their digital platforms and even through their uh, print journalism and other platforms, I think they're trying to push a narrative that because Hindus are in a majority, that's why there can be no atrocities on the Hindus in India. And I think Bangladesh and Pakistan and the atrocities that are happening on the Hindus there are probably not even featured. So that is something that needs to change. And even very small communities like the Rohingyas of Myanmar, they get such a footage. And but the Hindus who die in Bangladesh, the Western media does not pick it up. They don't report it. So that is something, that is a bias that needs to change. I think the mentality needs to change here.
One of the things is you have to start ignoring Western media. And really, I really like that part of the speech of Prime Minister Modi. We have to talk about ourselves more,
Right.
because the media is not even trusted by the Americans.
Right.
So the Western media has lost its relevance, and is not trusted by even the local Americans. So they don't quote. But in India, Washington Post m- makes a big news. And whereas in the US, Washington Post is a struggling newspaper. It is just surviving because it is owned by a billionaire. Otherwise, it
Right.
won't survive even for a day. So we have to start seeing Western media and the Western propaganda in the universities as garbage, because most of it is based on lies. And unfortunately, today, America, it is at a stage where the facts are often not regarded. But when it comes to the State Department has to validate the facts. And that's where the rubber meets the road. Actually, again, I'm using the phrase today. I don't know why. It got stuck in my brain today. So, so that's where actually the things happen. So somewhere Indians have to stop Twitter propagandas, stop Facebook propagandas, because all these are controlled by ultra left organizations, including
Absolutely.
to some
Yes.
extent the popular channels, even the YouTube also. They are not going to even comment on any fact-based news. Actually, they just publish whatever it is there. So I
Right.
mean, somewhere, so the change is needed in India or Indians to stop treating the Western news sources as authentic. Don't you think that is going to solve the problem?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, in India, what usually happens is that we have our, plethora of news channels and newspapers of our own. What happens is it all boils down to what is the leaning of these news channels, which side of the ideological framework do they lean towards. So there are certain newspapers, certain news channels which lean left. There are certain news channels and newspapers which lean right. So the ones which lean left, they are the ones who actually focus on all this reportage which comes from the West. So they are and of course digital the platforms like the print, scroll, the wire. These are the digital platforms which actually lean left or left of center, and they actually pick up whatever comes from, say, the New York Times or the Washington Post and all these other newspapers, or the new YouTube channels that are popular in the West, and whatever news they throw at us, basically. So they take it up, and also all these famous intellectuals, quote unquote, from the Lutyens lobby in New Delhi. So they are the ones who actually give a lot of importance to the Western media, because they believe that whatever the West says is authentic, and whatever is reported in the Indian media is inauthentic. So when we were talking about the reportage of COVID cases, also it was blown out of proportion. What was happening in India was something that was reported in such a manner by these Western news sources, that it was actually something which was blown out of proportion, something which was they portrayed it as something which was out of control, which the Indian state could not control, which was not the case at all. So and they were not looking at their backyard, what was happening in the US, and they were criticizing Indian government, they were criticizing the government of Uttar Pradesh, they were criticizing Narendra Modi ji's government. So all these things. So it depends on which side of the spectrum you're from. So the left leaning journalists will always try to pick up sources from the West and quote those sources and try to push us at a certain narrative. So that of course happens, and of course we have very wonderful uh, you know uh, people who are sitting in judgment of the government all the time, the human rights people in India. So they also in fact try to quote these foreign media sources in order to push a certain narrative. Yes, I believe that the Western media needs to acknowledge that there is a problem against the Hindus of Bangladesh, Pakistan, and even in India. But to say that whatever the West says is valid and whatever we say is invalid is something which needs to change. I think this entire mindset of giving primacy to the West over ourselves is something that absolutely needs to change.
The constant, if you look at the Human Rights Watch or the International Human Rights Watch, there, see, the agenda is all about who pays the media. The other side of, see, when you expect justice from the media, it is a wrong expectation, especially for Hindus and Buddhists also. Buddhists, Hindus, and all other religions who are non-Abrahamic, including native cultures. There is no justice for them. So there is a caricature which is being propagated, where the any kind of shamanism is bad, which is in Peru.
Yeah.
Very similar to rituals of Sanatan Dharma, or the native cultures of Mexico. Very few people know that Mexico has 3,600 native dialects, languages, sorry. Mexico, just a small Mexico. Mexico is a large country, actually looks small on the map, but it's a large country. But in terms of no languages, local languages are promoted. Only Spanish is promoted. Now, it's a colonial legacy. And I really liked one thing about the Modi's speech was that he spoke about what Sattology, we all do that. I'm an author of 11 books, and one of my book is Gold, Glory, and God, and in which I speak about the atrocities on the natives. Now, all those things are not spoken in the Western media or taught in the Western schools and colleges across the West. In fact, Hinduism is depicted in a very negative way in the American textbooks, where American textbooks say Krishna created the caste system. Krishna created the caste system. That's what it says. So this is the kind of information is going on. And one thing is there that the proactive steps are taken by the Indian universities, and say they de-recognize these campuses. They de-recognize the Indic studies in many places. This kind of proactive step is going to stop it. But if we continue, like for example, there are many so-called Indian American named organizations which are actually run by the spy agencies of enemies of India, including China. And for that, the Indian government or the Indian consulate or Indian universities have to come forward and say what they are. So, so that kind of proactive steps stops the disinformation campaign which is going on. And believe me, it may not affect India now, or it may short or temporarily, but in the long run is going to create a deep divide between the West and India. That's what their goal is. They have an ulterior goal, but that is the goal is. So don't you think a proactive steps on the ground by the by all the Indian universities can help reverse the situation, and then we can help in telling the world about the values of temples and how the Hindu temples help in human development.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, Indian universities can play a very important role. In fact, now with the new government, I mean, this government, the incumbent government, I think we can work towards creating a very, very inclusive approach to education. And as I mentioned, the NEP is a step in the right direction. Indian universities, I would like to tell you about the kind of curriculum that is taught in Indian universities, which first of all needs to change. So, as far as history is concerned, as far as social science is concerned, again, there is a lot of emphasis on the perspective of the Marxists. Now, as long as we don't question that, as long as we don't get out of this Marxist colonial hangover that we have, I don't think we'll be able to, convey something to the West. The first thing is that we have to repair ourselves from within. So the first thing is that we need to, at the level of the Indian universities, we need to understand, we need to teach our own students the values, Bharatiya values, Indian values, values of our civilization. So that has to happen to begin with. And then only we can tell the West that, Indian civilization is about these values. And we need to counter the Marxist perspective. We need to counter whatever has been, told to us for these many centuries. And only then, I think, when we develop an understanding of who we are, what our civilizational values are, what our civilizational goals should be, that we can, translate it to our foreign policy, to how we deal with the Western powers, to how we deal with scholars and the media, which has been attacking us from all parts of the globe. So the change has to first come as far as our curriculum in Indian universities is concerned. Places in JNU and other colleges and universities in India are still teaching a very, very, you know, uh, uh, left-leaning kind of a curriculum. So that is something which needs to change in the first place. We need to understand that if we don't have our own if we don't have our own perspective, if we don't have an understanding of what our history was, how great our past, how great our past was, how beautiful our civilization is, I don't think if we continue to follow this Marxist paradigm, I don't think much can change. So for us to, to question the West, or to question the Western understanding of India, first we need to develop this, understanding of, ourselves, how our history uh, is much beyond what the colonial masters told us. So that is something that that understanding has to develop, and the Marxist perspective on Indian history has to be questioned, has to be countered. So that is something that has to happen. The change has to take place first here.
Karl Marx has already died, and it is dying every day. So, the global left nowadays is something else than what it was initially meant to be. So, and the global left is all about economics now, and how to maximize profits. That's what they're there for, and destroying any native civilization. That's what their goal is, because the natives come in a strong way in the path of their economic goals. Because that's why nationalism is bad and patriotism is good. So constitutional democracies are better, republics are better, and the nationalism is bad. But my question to them is, natives, the word native and the nationalism are tied at the root, etymologically tied at the root. Now, coming back to another question is that the Hindu temples were designed for education, community development, human development. So most of the Hindu temples used to have pathshala, where people used to get their graduate degrees. University system was run by the temples. The temples were the important source of community development. And you will see most of the shopping malls. Even today, the shopping markets are near the temples, even today. But earlier, so now the temples are being gradually replaced by shopping malls. Gradually. We go to temples only to go to a good sightseeing. So just imagine all the ancient Hindu temples or temples all over the world, ancient temples, which before the Abrahamism colonized everything. Most of them were located in the best scenic spots, all of them. So people can go there and feel little bit of an entertainment. The mind becomes more clean, cleansed. Now the exactly reverse is happening, is that who goes to a temple? Like the media shows up, and Indians gave a very befitting reply to some movies also recently. And I won't take any name because taking their name is glorifying them in any way, recognizing them. So those movies, so there is some kind of awakening happening. And also the West recognizes the scientific side of the Hindu temples. They all recognize it. That's why they don't speak about it. So won't it help that to have a movement where let's go back to our temples? Let's do that. And when we go back to our temples, naturally the temples start getting promoted. Oftentimes you hear from the Hindu community that the pandas are asking money. The reason is all the money is taken away from the temples in any case by the in form of taxes. And whereas the other Abrahamic religious institutions are not even taxed. Don't you think that is a major reason that the old British and Islamic policies of not promoting the temple is still going on?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, when we look at temples in India, a lot of them, in fact, a lot of these temples are symbols of our, Indic culture. And as you very rightly pointed out, that these temples were not only religious places, but they were also places of education, of culture. They were also places which, in fact, promoted sustainable development because they were attached with water reservoirs. So they also understood the fact that water needs to be conserved. A lot of these temples were very, very wealthy because of the land grants that were given to these temples. They were also repositories of wealth. So temples in ancient India, and as it continues today, they're not only places of religious significance, of course they are, but they also have a very important role to play in Indian society in terms of culture, in terms of the the fact that there are places where people go to learn, and they were places of learning even in the past. So yes, as was mentioned by you, that Indian temples are being taxed. A lot of these temples are in fact in shambles. They are in a very bad condition, and because of this, of course. There are issues related to the priests demanding money, but what does one do? So the government has to free these temples from taxation, because this is like the jizya that Hindus used to pay during the Islamic rule, and of course during the colonial period also, when these temples were of course kept in a very bad condition. So we need to of course free these temples from government control. The mosques, dargahs, churches, they are not taxed, and we know that what kind of propaganda of course goes on in these institutions. So as far as temples are concerned, I feel that temples need to be restored to their past glory. We have restored the structures, the edifices of these temples have been restored. A lot of the temples that were broken down during the Islamic conquests, for example, Somnath has been restored. But a lot of these temples have just become places of tourist interest. So people go, people do some kind of a puja, and then they take selfies outside these temple premises. These temples are not places of tourism. These temples are places where one needs to go and actually absorb the spiritualism, the spirituality. One has to understand that temples are places which are of a certain significance to the Indian civilization. So what happens is that because of lack of understanding and lack of interest of the Indian youth, particularly, they go to these temples, they take selfies, they post it on social media. So for them, it is some sort of a tourism. So the spiritual aspect, the cultural aspect, that is something that needs to be restored. I think one interesting way would be to engage people, train people, and conduct temple walks where people can be told about the history of these temples. Why are these temples important? So that is something, the way heritage walks are conducted to these Islamic monuments, I think that should be done to temples as well. So, for example, in Delhi, in Delhi, we have a lot of temples of very of a lot of religious significance. So instead of doing heritage walks to these Islamic monuments and glorifying the monuments which were constructed by the invaders, I think people should be taken to these temples and they should be told about the significance of these temples. And of course, the Indian state is uh, you know uh, Indian state should be, in fact, forced to, through a movement or through a signature campaign, they should be told that temples should be free of taxation, because this is not Islamic rule where we should be paying tax for having a place of worship. So that is something that needs to happen. So I think the one way is to promote the fact that Indian temples are of a lot of significance for our civilization, and also the spiritual significance of these temples, the cultural significance of these temples. And instead of promoting these Islamic monuments, I think our temples need to be promoted, and of course taxes should be withdrawn. So I think that is the way one can promote Indian temples, because we have a lot of ancient temples. Uh, Edifices have been repaired, but they have not been restored to their past glory. So that is something that needs to happen.
We need to have a movement, go back to the temple, something like that.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
also the see, most of the new religion or the new Hindus, they like to talk about philosophies without recognizing temple. And there are even talks that forget about Devi Devta, forget about all those cultures, and creating new idols, uh, which are not authorized by the Vedic scriptures. You cannot whimsically create an idol. It's not allowed in the Shastra. Now, there are specific names given for Devi Devta who are worshipped and who needs to be worshipped. People who are responsible for those things. That information comes from Shastra. Also, the another thing about Bhagavad Gita is, in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says 3 times that those who ignore the Shastra have no basis, and those people actually create utpat, or the troubles in the society. So there are a lot of new age Hindu leaders also who do not recognize the Shastra. And there are also the new age leaders who say that you have to get the knowledge from within. But that is not there in the Vedic Shastra. Like Vishwamitra says, follow me. And Vishwamitra teaches Sri Ram. Sri Ram doesn't need to be taught by Vishwamitra, but he teaches Sri Ram. And Agastya Muni doesn't need to give any Upadesh to Ram, but he does it still. So our culture is different. So what do you say about those people who actually, in outwardly, they are Hindu leaders, but they do not focus on the essence of the Veda, or their teachings go completely away from the shloka? Like Krishna is very clear. Tasma Shastra Vidhanoktam Karya Karya Vyavastito. Like without Shastra, you cannot decide what is to be done, what is not to be done. Only the Asura rejects the Shastra, and then he engages in his own mind based. And this is very common for the Hindu leaders I'm talking about. So what do you say about that? Because that actually damages the Hindu culture.
Absolutely. I mean, there have been a lot of these self-professed Hindu leaders or religious gurus in India of late, and I think this entire idea of rejecting the Vedas or rejecting the Shastras
A little bit
is,
interject here. I'll just
yes,
interject here, Chandni, that,
yes,
I have no problem with self-professed, because if you know something, speak about it. This is 21st century. I have no problem with that. But purposely going out and campaigning, see, first of all, if somebody says, I'm a bhakt of this Mahadev is respected by all of us, worshipped by all of us. But not following what he says exactly in the Shastra. There are many stories of Mahadev where he speaks in the Shastra. So when Krishna is talking or Bhagavad Gita is talking, they're talking about those kind of scenarios. So people purposely, I have no problem self-professed. If you know something, I will be accept you as a guru immediately. Yes, you are. But quote a relevant shloka or relevant shastra. Like many of the places I went, some people they say they will talk about yoga, but there is no Bhagavad Gita in their entire temple. Without Yogeshwar, where is Bhagavad Gita? Where is yoga?
absolutely.
And they talk about Adi Yogi, but not a single picture of Yogeshwar or Mahadev's words on yoga. Patanjali was a devotee of Mahadev. So
Absolutely.
they will know no words about Patanjali. So that's the thing I'm talking about. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So yes, I mean, I think going as we spoke about going back to the temples, I think going back to our scriptures is also extremely important. So for a lot of these gurus, religious gurus, and their followers, I believe what has happened of late is that there's been a lot of emphasis, as we were mentioning, that there's been a lot of emphasis on looking within, but looking within is not possible without having some knowledge of what our scriptures have to say. So in fact, instead of emphasizing on this concept of looking within, the first thing that all these religious gurus should be telling their disciples is to read the scriptures, because from our scriptures, I think we get to know everything that one needs to know about living, about how to live. So whether it is the Vedas or the Upanishads or the Ramayana or the Bhagavad Gita, I think if one reads the scriptures, that is the crux of the knowledge that one needs to have. So instead of focusing on artificiality, superficiality, I think the best thing would be for these religious gurus is to tell the disciples to in fact go back to the scriptures, what Dayanand Saraswati ji had said many years ago, go back to the Vedas. So going back to the scriptures is as important as going back to the temple. So both actually go hand in hand. So in fact, if we have to learn anything about spiritualism, about living our lives, about dharma, it is only the scriptures which will teach us what we need to learn. So instead what we are doing is that we are going to these gurus and falling at their feet. Instead of that, I think what needs to be done is to read these texts and to imbibe the knowledge that is given in these texts. So that is something that needs to be done. So going back to scriptures is the only way that our civilization can flourish, because people now, of course, and nowadays, as we are seeing, people are so busy. There's this there's this constant rush that people are in because of their jobs, because of various pressures that this modern lifestyle gives us, and so people don't have time to think about dharma, to think about what these scriptures have in fact given us. So we have a vast array of scriptures. We have so much written literature that and a lot of them. So it's not that people can't access them. They're all accessible. I think so. One needs to, instead of going to religious gurus or instead of doing something which is very superficial, I think the best thing is to read these scriptures and imbibe the knowledge. That is what I think. The gurus also should ask their disciples. So there's no harm in having a guru. People can go to these gurus, but the gurus should in fact guide their disciples to go back to the scriptures and imbibe all the knowledge that is given there.
It is very ironical Yogeshwar Krishna promotes the gurus, but the gurus don't promote him. It's funny, isn't it?
Right.
The Bhagavad Gita,
Right.
4th
Absolutely.
chapter, 34th shloka says Tadvidhi pranipatena. He's saying, ask from a Tatodarshi who sees
Mm.
him. But gurus are not promoting it. So
Right.
it is a very, it is like a, what do you call it? A person who doesn't thank you for what he's doing. So here Yogeshwar Krishna is promoting the gurus, but the gurus don't promote him. It's very
Right.
ironical.
Right.
Mahadev is promoting his disciples, but disciples not promoting Mahadev. Actually what
Right.
he says, his conversations with different people, his conversations with Parvati, nobody is talking about those, because the
Right.
moment you hear those conversations, you get shell shocked that today what I was saying till date, Mahadev is saying exactly opposite. People
Right.
people are shocked actually. If you read even Bhagavad Gita, people don't read Bhagavad Gita hardly. They read anything nowadays, and they just comment on it based on the Wikipedia, and they say salvation and all these things. The word salvation comes from saliva, same words, similar,
Right.
and
Right.
salvation just means satisfaction. But the people don't even go there. People don't go into etymology. People don't go into Sanskrit vyakaran, where what is the Sanskrit word actually meaning. So the level of discourse is so low that people like me and you, we have hard time. We have to always come to the basics. Always come to the
Absolutely.
basics. So I have created another group now, which is only discusses with the higher level of Shastra, so that there is some sanity maintained for the authors also.
Right.
And there is a discourse which we need to say, simple discourse on the YouTube channels. These YouTube channels are generally the simple discourses, like we don't share everything because we know people won't understand. People are only interested in story of Parshuram, but exactly what Parshuram did, how he was punished by Sri Ram, what was he punished for, these things are not shown at all. So then there is no connection. I mean, very few people, but it's still it's a large number. I'll say 200 million Hindus are very sincere, at least 200 million, which is a larger population than any other culture of the world put together. And so Hindus have the largest percentage of well-educated Vedic scholars, but a lot more needs to be done. And the second thing is, if you look at Mahabharat and you see Sahadev's character was Sahadev. I'm just saying the word character in a party way, but he was a pracharak. He used to talk about Bhagavad Puran. So even though Bhagavad Puran was not written at that time, but the concepts were still there. It is a compiled. He would share all those information all over the masses. But I don't see any ministerial position in Indian government where it deals with the prachar of the Vedic Shastra. There should be a new minister created for that, because otherwise this is not going to happen. You cannot protect temple unless you know the reason or importance of why to protect the temple. It's not possible, because people, hospital, there is a reason that yes, it cures the sick people. But what about, so that is called Rugunalaya. But what about Devalaya? There is nobody to promote Devalaya, the whole concept behind Devalaya. So don't you think a need is there on this Independence Eve, that a department needs to be set up exclusively to a minister, cabinet minister needs to be appointed to promote these? I'll to give one more example. Yudhishthir's cabinet had a Jyotishi also, cabinet minister rank, Dhamma Rishi. Dhamma Rishi was a Jyotishi, and he used to advise Pandavas on Muhurta and every important decision. He was part of it. Every single decision of the Pandava was presided over by the Dhamma Rishi. Even though Yudhishthir was, and all the Pandavas were well trained, or even probably more spiritually advanced than their own Rishi also. So this was the position. Don't you think is it necessary now today?
Yes, absolutely. I think uh, the state must, in fact, appoint someone who uh, promotes not only the scriptures but also the fact that we have such a beautiful tradition of these temples which were once destroyed, which have been restored to some extent to their past glory, and why people need to go back to these temples. And of course, I mean, Vedic science is something that needs to be promoted. and of course, this ministry can look at all aspects of Vedic science, astronomy, the Vedas, temples. So I think a separate ministry, would be a wonderful thing if the Indian state, if the Indian government creates such a ministry. I think it will very well help in the regeneration of our civilizational values, because a lot of people, especially the youth, they have absolutely no clue about what we are discussing right now. They actually don't know. So when we talk about temples, or when we talk about reclaiming temples, they draw a blank. There is no idea of actually what happened to these temples. Why this talk of the Ram Janmabhoomi? Why this talk of the Kashi Vishwanath corridor? They don't know, they don't have an idea of what is happening, so they are very happy in their cozy little spaces. So I think if this ministry is created, and if these aspects of our culture and civilization and our religion are promoted in that sense, uh, you know uh, through the efforts of the state, through the efforts of the government, I think that will definitely help in enlightening these people who take very little interest in these things. So yes, I completely agree with you that we must have a separate ministry which actually looks at these matters. So it will be very helpful to, in fact, inculcate a sense of responsibility towards protecting our religion, towards protecting our culture, towards protecting our temples and scriptures. I think it will be very helpful.
Yeah, just like India has a minority commission, US has a minority
Yes,
commission. In India, they should have a Devalaya, cabinet minister for Devalaya, which is
absolutely.
I hope they don't bring secularism into that also. Otherwise, they'll
So that
destroy
concept has
it.
actually ruined us, Aditya. I think that concept has really ruined us. I think we need to just look beyond that concept now.
Secularism, see, see, the India is 10 years behind the rest of the world. Obviously, Asura is always ahead. The Asura is always ahead of Devtas. So, in terms of
Right.
planning ways to destroy the world, they're always ahead. So, India is 10 years behind. So, I think it will take further 10 years before India realizes that, oh, secularism, they are the only country left in the world to follow it.
Absolutely.
America is
Yes. I
not a
think that
secular
that
country.
concept, yes, they're not a secular country at all, and a lot of these other European countries are also very non-secular in that sense. They're proclaimed Christian nations, but
Exactly.
yeah, I mean that concept has completely ruined it. I don't know why we are shying away from calling ourselves a Hindu nation, because that is our identity, I think. But
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. I mean, all the Islamic countries are Islamic, and
right.
the and the America is a Judeo-Christian. That's what the leaders say. They take oath on the Bible.
Yeah,
And the UK is a Christian, Protestant Christian country. All the ceremonies are held in Westminster Abbey, so all these things are there. And India is the only remaining country where we say secularism is too much, and every country takes care of the majority. India is the only country where they don't take care of the majority. They're taking them for granted. Believe me, when Hindus are not there, India will be poor country like Pakistan, very clearly. You know? So thank you so much, Chandni ji, for coming on the show and sharing your thoughts. And do get her book. And I'm going to post the picture of her book on this channel as well. And you can get her book from Amazon. It's called Hindu Temples, and the full title is, it will be Episodes from an Oppressive Era. So thank you so much, Chandni for coming on the
Thank
show.
you so much, Aditya ji, for having me on the show. It was really nice having this discussion with you.
Thank
And a very happy Independence Day once again to all the Indians in the United States.
thank you. Namaskar.
Namaskar.